Well, welcome to our February webinar on adaptability and flexibility. Are you living like a slinky? I am Linda Nelson, the president of ICOR. It actually isn't January 26th. Sorry, I forgot to update that. It is February 23rd. And a lot of the work that we're doing on our webinars is based on international standards, management system, as well as guidance documents, as well as work that we've been doing in the field ourselves and referencing other work that is being done by other research organizations. In 2022, our focus is on exploring the science of individual resilience. And what we wanted to understand were the skills, the knowledge, and the behaviors present in people who are able to thrive in the midst of constant change. And as part of that, this month's webinar is on being adaptable and flexible. And we need to understand why organizations themselves need to be adaptable and flexible. We also need to learn how to be more adaptable and flexible in your own response to change. And then the organization needs to consider how to apply this knowledge to hiring and professional development practices. Because as we know, Charles Darwin said, it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It's really the one that's the most adaptable to change. And this hasn't changed at all. This is a constant in our change. And really, there is no more powerful tool for survival than our ability to adapt. And we've all been experiencing ever increasing uncertainty and change. And so, as part of that, the organization, as well as its people, must have the ability to change, evolve, and adapt in responding to those changing circumstances, and have the ability to apply your existing resources to new purposes in order to survive and thrive. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. As usual, the recording should be available on the ICOR webinar page within a day or two. So if you'd like to watch it again or you want to share it with um, an associate, it's available there. I have to tell you that when I put this original presentation together, it was 142 slides, which obviously doesn't cover very well in about 55 minutes. So I have cut it way down, but I want you to know that I probably won't be able to answer your questions at the conclusion of the webinar unless I talk really, really fast, which I've been asked not to do in the past. I do have the ability to speak at more than a normal rate of language, but anyways, we will answer any questions in your emails after the webinars when you get your certificate. And just be patient about when you receive the certificate. The person that was managing this has left, and we have bringing somebody new on board, and so some of that, getting the certificate immediately afterwards might be a little bit delayed. So just be patient with us. You will get it before the next webinar. I wanted to really draw attention to the organizational resilience capability assessment, and this is for the organization itself. We also have, one for our teaching pieces. But what I want you to notice here is the 5 dimensions on leadership and strategy, culture and behavior, infrastructure, preparedness and managing risk, and looking at that innovation and continuous improvement. And then looking at the strategies or capabilities that support that. And so I want you to just be aware that everything that we're talking about today ties back to these capabilities in one or more ways. We're not going to talk about each one of these capabilities, but everything we're talking about today relates to one or more of those. We also talk about enabling behaviors and how the organization and its people actually operate. So as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about how to be adaptable and flexible, what that means, what does it look like, how can you engage in those behaviors today. Next month, we're going to be looking at how to be resourceful, creative, and innovative. In April, we're going to look at how to be inclusive and collaborative. In May, being prepared, robust, and redundant, and then moving on to be aware and reflective, and then diverse and integrated. And one of the things I want you to just notice is I know that, diversity, equity, and inclusion is normally all talked about at the same time. In this case, we're going to be talking about being inclusive and collaborative as one aspect and being diverse and integrated as a separate aspect. Because it's a broader topic, it's about diversity of thought and behavior as well. And so This is why we've separated those out into those types of behaviors. So, we've heard, the age-old thought that the only constant in life is change. And we also know that just being tired and frustrated and melancholy can kind of wear you down and wears down your ability to be adaptable, which can then be replaced with more things like anxiety and aggression and conflict. And I just wanted to kind of lay that out there at the front end, is that resilience takes an immense interpersonal audacity and effort, and it's not a steady state. And if you've listened to any of our webinars last year in particular, you should really have a clear understanding by now that resilience is not static. It's something that changes and based on the stressors that you're encountering. And at some points in your life, you might be more resilient or less, depending on what's happening. And understand that that's the same is true for your organization. And we know that people that are somewhat more adaptable, just, generally, are able to be more of a leader, and they tend to be happier people in both their professional and personal lives. And we also know that having this kind of versatile employee can be an asset to any team, and that helps you to cultivate that competitive advantage. And so we really do need to be focusing on how adaptable our people are, and how to make them more adaptable and flexible. Because if adaptability prepares us for adversity, who really doesn't need that kind of an advantage? This is a chart. There's an organization called study.com you can join and you can pay for a bunch of their education programs. And what we're seeing more and more, by the way, is in graduate school programs, certificate programs, as well as in university programs, there's more and more talk about how to be adaptable, how to make the workplace adaptable. It's becoming part of the core curriculum. So I just wanted to kind of preface the beginning of this webinar by talking about, the old normal and what is the new future, or where we're actually at right now. Starting here at the top left, people like my parents, they had their job, they had the job. That's the job they had at the company for their entire lives. And so employee longevity with individual companies was relatively high, where now we're seeing people change employers frequently, and especially right now. It's really crazy. One of the other things was that wages and benefits were the key motivators. I still think wages and benefits are a motivator, but it's been supplemented with work-life balance, the flexibility of your job, and what are your advancement opportunities. We also see that communications have drastically changed with technology, and that professional communication used to always be by telephone or face-to-face contact. Where now, obviously, even before the pandemic, email and texting and virtual meeting platforms were in place, but now they're really dominating corporate communication. And one of the things I'm seeing, that even when people are back in the office, they're still using the virtual meeting platforms, because not everyone is back in the office, for example. We also saw in the old normal that when you had a particular job, employees sharing similar roles or assignments were located together geographically. So oftentimes, if you were getting a change in your job, you might have to move. Well, now we know that virtual teams can accommodate workers who live nearly anywhere in the world. And again, this is everything we're going to be talking about today are jobs that are more office type jobs versus jobs that require you to be on site, like a laboratory or something like that. Where full-time roles dominated the employment landscape, what you really need to start considering is that contract, part-time, and consulting roles are on the rise. And because of this idea of work-life balance and being able to be flexible, people are less likely in the future to want to have that one full-time role, and they're going to be asking you for different types of roles to have at your company. Also, I still consider retirement as an ultimate goal. I don't want to work forever. But this idea that workers relied on a generous pension agreement as being their primary retirement income. And we know right now, and we've known for years, that retirements are delayed and people are working to, being older and older, and they are not getting an employer pension. This is something that really doesn't hardly exist anymore unless you've been with the same company for a really long time. Also in the past, pretty much all the government structures were vertical, with key decisions being made from the top of the organization. We're seeing more and more, and you're going to always hear us talk in every single webinar and education program that we provide about how governance structures are being more horizontal and flatter, and that with key decisions are made in collaboration with the people closest to the actual work. And finally, most business was done locally or regionally, and the talent was sourced locally, where now we're seeing that business can be conducted internationally with really limited barriers, and you can get your talent from anywhere in the world as long as they don't all have to work at the same time every day. And this is really the new future, and if it isn't the current, the way things are currently, it's the way things are going to be very shortly. I always like to start with, what are we talking about? So some kind of a definition. So when we're looking at what's an adaptable organization, the definition that ICOR uses is that it's an organization that's accepting of ever-increasing uncertainty and change. And the organization and its people have the ability to change, evolve, and adapt in response to those changing circumstances. And they have the ability to apply existing resources to new purposes. So how can we get to where we need to be with what we have? There's mechanisms in place to continuously evolve, and the organization is able to modify their activities rather than seeking solution based on the status quo. So again, our purpose may have changed, and so how are we going to modify our activities to meet that purpose? And then you really need to build adaptability and flexibility into your systems by creating systems that can evolve and maneuver quickly in that changing landscape, both when you're trying to avoid risk as well as when you're trying to capitalize on opportunities. And the definition for flexible, we kind of use the word adaptable, agile, and flexible interchangeably often in the workplace, but just kind of our formal definition is that you have designed flexibility into the organization's systems so that it can understand and adapt to that rapid pace of change, to be able to be fit for the future and develop the agility to make decisions quickly. And again, to act to manage risks and seize opportunities. It also implies that the organization and its people can change, evolve, and adapt in response to those changing circumstances. And here's where we add that caveat that it may favor a decentralized approach. It does sound like somebody is unable to hear me. I'm assuming that everyone is able to hear me, or there would be a bigger outcry. So it's probably, I don't know, they can't hear me say that it's probably needing a volume adjustment on your end, but maybe if someone can share that in the chat. Understanding also that flexibility can be achieved through the introduction of new knowledge and technologies as needed. It also means considering and incorporating indigenous or traditional knowledge and practices in new ways. So you can see that kind of the adaptable and flexible organizations aren't really that different. So when the question becomes, how do adaptable and flexible organizations behave? Again, we're talking about these enabling behaviors. So what does it look like for leadership and governance? In this case, decision makers take into account the best possible evidence. So they're using data and evidence, including potential future scenarios and innovations. They've got supportive behaviors that embrace innovation and they try to remove barriers. And when they do that, people are rewarded, recognized, acknowledged, and that resources are focused on those initiatives with the best potential to increase the organization's value and values. We also see that your organizational resilience is structured around that mixture of centralized and decentralized networked interested parties. So again, connecting people, and we'll talk more about that, through that coordinated central program itself, and that the structures and roles and responsibilities for this rapid gathering, collation, and sharing and use of data and information are defined. These are really high level topics that we're going to talk more about, but I wanted to set the baseline. You need to have a resilient strategy. So you should have adaptive pathways to promote kind of that just-in-time decision making. If you need to make decisions quickly, you have to have a system to do that. So how do you get around kind of the bureaucracy of it to make decisions quickly? And then what is your decision point analysis? So you need to have that as part of your program and project management activities. Understanding that your strategy and program can't be fixed. Again, you're trying to deal with managing change, but they need to be kept fluid to make sure they're agile and they're evolved based on needs and that they're able to accelerate when you need to. And really that focus is on the speed and the tempo of the change, which is trying to help prevent indecision and inertia. That's really the biggest issue that you have. If you're not thinking things through ahead of time, you're going to be stuck with indecision inertia, which then, stops you from being able to make decisions quickly. We've talked a lot about the importance of the organization's vision and values. And so this is something where also that's something that needs to be regularly reviewed. Are we still relevant? Is what we're doing still making sense based on the changes that are happening around us? And so making sure that your vision and your values are people and outcome focused, and you're going to hear this theme coming through again and again, and that it's strongly influenced by the need to create a culture of resilience within the organization. And we did talk about this culture of resilience in our December webinar. You also have a shared understanding that your strategic decisions are based on robust and deep and broad and far-sighted data and projections, are not just reacting to the latest, but that you've got data. Again, I continue to focus on the fact that we need to make decisions based on information, and data helps us to provide a lot of that information. And making sure that your data is supported by science and policy interface, the bringing together kind of those policymakers, as well as the best possible science and data. And this builds on really any existing joint strategic needs that your group might be working on. And finally, you need to make sure that your new knowledge and information can be integrated into that decision-making processes as that evidence matures. You heard us talk a lot about engagement and making sure that your people are engaged. And so, of course, you need to have an effective means of engagement that really ties into that information sharing. So we've talked about having the data and the information that needs to be shared throughout the organization to really enhance situational awareness for everybody that is involved. And making sure that you've got a united vision and narrative and master plan, and that you're using that to support those ever greater levels of empowerment and decentralization. So the more decentralized you are, the more stakeholder engagement and communication that you need. And then making sure that you've got mechanisms in place to adapt in response to the feedback from those stakeholders. We also know that causes of change resistance um, need to be acknowledged. I mean, this is a big deal. We all of us hate when the latest change management initiative comes into place, and you've got somebody there that's going to take care of it all, and then you've got the rest of the people that are saying, "Oh, just let me ignore this till they're gone," or whatever it is. But when we're dealing in a world that's changing so quickly, it's going to be very important that you acknowledge who among you is resisting that change and figure out how to actively manage that resistance, and making sure that you've got a strong change narrative as well as enough engagement to get people to listen to you. And of course, again, this flexibility is enabled when you have flatter structures and more empowered teams. And making sure that there's a clear agenda of investment in the infrastructure that's flexible. So again, what kinds of systems do you need to have in place to make sure that you can keep that communication and stakeholder engagement going? Which ties us to, the next behavior, which is having an understanding of your systems. You need to have agile, adaptive, and intelligent integrated systems. So, if your organization is not using AI, and other types of systems to be able to get this information, they certainly should be. And depending on the size of your organization and what it does, you might be, farther along this than others. But you need to be able to make sure that you're improving your data and information flow so that you can analyze and share it effectively, that you can turn it into a shared understanding, and then that data and information can be used to make that evidence-based decisions. So that to do that, you need to make sure that your data is presented in ways that it's simple to understand, using high levels of visualization, and that you're monitoring your data in real time to help you provide with that situational awareness that you need, helps you populate those system models and provide feedback on those metrics. And this is, by the way, very possible to have real-time data and not have to just be reporting, even monthly anymore. We can have data that you should have access to. And finally, we really need to be, not finally, but learning is a whole piece of this. And you've heard me talk a lot in the past about learning systems, and make sure that you've got a system in place to teach people. And this is now going to include teaching people to be more adaptable and flexible, because learning needs to be considered as a critical asset. And if you want your organization to be agile and adaptive, or adaptive and flexible, you need to make sure that you're teaching people how to do that. A lot of us sometimes only focus on the shocks and the stressors and the trends. So understanding that that this is part of what needs to be reported on with our data. And so we also need to make sure that that trend data is presented in ways that make them simple to understand, using as many visuals as you can and looking at what your exposures are. So doing things like exposure mapping and looking at what are the changes to our risk profile. And again, what are your common metrics? So what are the values that you're looking at for assessing the impact and the opportunity to allow kind of effective prioritization of those. You also need, of course, to be monitoring, reviewing. You can't manage change if you're not paying attention to it. And so making sure that whatever systems you're using to do that and what technology tools you're using is up to date so that they can do the job that they need to do. And making sure that you have the right people in place. We've heard this a lot too, that companies might put together a system, but there isn't anybody in their company that knows how to run it. And so here is where it becomes a challenge for organizations when technology is changing so quickly, is to make sure they have the right people in place to do that. And that might mean that you have to contract out for some of that. Again, you might have to look at how you're actually doing your work and making sure that that horizon scanning is part of that. So I want to move next to a really good paper by Deloitte. It's called The Adaptable Organization, and this was just recently published. And the next grouping of slides is going to talk about it. And one of the things I'm really excited about is that they're really taking the same vision to having a more resilient organization as ICOR has been taking, and they've done a really nice job with some of the graphics. So we know that in a world where the future is uncertain, organizations should really start considering shifting stable and predictable characteristics to being more adaptable. And so some of these things are also common to what you might see in that agile types of piece. So moving from being a profit-driven organization to being a purpose-driven. And in this online article, you can actually kind of click out and get a little score for yourself if you'd like to. But it's helping you to just start thinking through. So as we're doing this, think through to your organizations. To what extent is your organization moving to being purpose-driven versus profit-driven? To what extent have you moved to customer-focused, being internally focused? How do you use your teams? Are they a flexible network of teams, or are you still more of a hierarchical structure? To what extent have you implemented agile ways of working, or is it just for agile project management in IT, or maybe you're not even doing that? Or are you still sitting in more of a siloed type of interaction? When we're looking at performance management or talent management, is it one size fits all, or are you moving to more of an individualized talent management system? And what about your resistance to change? Have you really been focusing on the idea that this is about continuous change and learning, or are you just trying to just get back to where you were? And so thinking about those things becomes kind of the baseline for where we are moving forward. So what I really liked is what they've put together is kind of the adaptability layers. So first off, you're looking at your ecosystem and whether your organization is kind of one organization or whether you're global and you've got different locations, for example, or you're regionalized, whatever it is. What kind of ecosystem do you operate in? So what's your work environment? Is it a manufacturing? Is it more of a services type of thing? So looking at how the work environment operates itself and how it operates within other companies like yours. And so you need to have, again, you're going to hear this word purpose driven. That's why we've been talking about purpose so much in the past year. And so looking at making sure you have a purpose driven ecosystem that defines your customer with defined customer focused mission. So again, moving from that internal focus to a customer focus. And then you look at how is your work organized within the organization itself. So, you need to organize your capabilities away from that deep hierarchy and silos towards a multidisciplinary type of organization, which means you're going to have teams. So how is your work delivered? You need to enable high performing teams by adopting connected ways of working and having an adaptable culture itself. We're not going to talk hugely about culture today because we talked a lot about it back in December. So that was some of the slides that I pulled out was the culture side of this, but you can reference that as well. And then looking at the leaders of your team. So how is your work led and managed? Leaders need to be inclusive orchestrators versus technical taskmasters. So kind of thinking even about yourself as a leader, how inclusive are you and how do you actually lead? Because sometimes you need to manage and sometimes you need to lead, but you need to be able to do so in a manner that unlocks the potential of the people that you're working with and those diverse skill sets. And then getting down to the individual itself in your organization. How is the actual work executed? And so we need to make sure that we have resilient people working for us and helping people to become more resilient through adaptive talent programs to help people and be enabled and how to grow and learn and develop within your system. It's not about getting rid of all your people. One of the things I've heard kind of proposed is, all right, we're going to kind of do an adaptability or slash resilience assessment. And those people that aren't, we're just getting rid of them. And I'm like, what? Why would you do something like that? You need to make sure that what you're doing is helping your current people who understand the organization and have that expertise and knowledge to become better and to become better, not just in their knowledge, but in how they behave. So going back to kind of this ecosystem approach, one of the things we have learned is that the ecosystem is going to be much more about openness and a worker-led organization. And you're probably going to see an increasing use of external flexible workers and with input from your customers. And you've heard about crowdsourcing and things. So looking at in your ecosystem itself, who are your competitors? Um, what's your customer focus? Where you're going with that? What kind of community do you reside? How do you use the crowd and how do you manage your collaborators? And to what extent are you going to use kind of a contingent workforce? So when we look at, really stable organizations, competitive advantage can be achieved using, really internally focused strategies because they're very, very stable. But when times are unpredictable, your survival is going to be really based on understanding a broader external ecosystem where your purpose and goals are targeted to customer missions. And this helps you. I've heard a lot of resiliency talk about that North Star, and that really goes back to your purpose. What are we here for, and what are we trying to accomplish? And so, even when you're looking at, kind of horizon scanning, making sure that you're scanning broadly enough to include these different groups because adaptable organizations really embed themselves in external networks and they position their workers to kind of even take on that role of being active sensors so that because if you're flatter, you're able to use your people to help you detect and scan and looking at those fluctuating customer needs. What is new? What's changed? How are we going to need to operate to manage that? And so ecosystems that leverage external communities, collaborations, and alliances are really better able to sense shifts in the environment and help them to remain competitive. And so having a shared purpose connects that ecosystem together and that really helps drive success through, looking at that through the eyes of your customers and your stakeholders as well as society. And it also helps people in your organization to succeed. And that shared purpose, really, we're talking a lot about the culture here because your culture should be tied around your purpose is that glue that holds your ecosystem together. And so if you don't have a strict and controlling hierarchy, that purpose really becomes, again, that North Star, reducing that need to constantly seek direction from superiors or wait for someone to make a decision because you understand what it is you're there for, which really brings your purpose statement to life and helps connect the dots for your people through that storytelling and meaningful narratives. And it helps your workers more likely to commit to the organization's strategy and execution, which is part of that being engaged. And there's so much data on how, people who are engaged in your organization, the benefit that that brings. And so when you design your organization, you need to balance that customer focused mission teams and those centralized functional capabilities to help you deploy your agility and efficiency more appropriately. But we look at organizational design, and if you looked at any of the curriculum that iCore offers, as well as any of the webinars that we've been talking about in our blogs, is looking at, again, we talk about being as decentralized as you can, being as flat as possible where it still makes sense. And so Again, when change is predictable, it's stable organizational hierarchies are okay, because there's really clear decision making and your silos are very functional and it's very efficient. But when you're dealing with times of change and change is not going away, what's being found more and more is that the traditional organizational models really can't keep up. And so this is how we think an organization works. You can see it looks very nice and we've got our kind of a little bit of overlap, but this is how we actually really work. And especially when you're looking at teams and people needing to collaborate and manage different projects and things. And so organizing work along these informal systems in a way that people that how they naturally behave and how they naturally work is really going to help you maximize opportunities to drive experimentation, to drive innovation, as well as idea generation, and really makes for a happier workforce. It's that whole network of people and feeling connected, not just to the people that are sitting next to you in your office cubicle. And so how do you move from that hierarchy design to a more adaptable design? And we're not saying that you're giving up efficiency, but we're saying that you're using efficiency to help drive your adaptability. And so, one approach is that shared services approach, which is usually, somewhat on the efficiency end of things. Again, it's designed for high efficiency, for goal specific execution, and very operational tasks. It has dedicated and often centralized teams where work is very standardized. It's very transactional, and the transitions from team to team are done with well-defined interfaces, and there's a potential for automation for some of those things. And in practice, what you're using is kind of that traditional shared support functions like finance and legal and payroll. You'll see that. And that's probably where you want to see some of those um, functions. You want them to be shared services, where you might then be able to see which parts of our organization can we move to be more of a resource pool, or we can, have kind of moderate adaptability and project specific execution. So we're kind of putting our adaptability tied to specific types of projects, and where you've got highly specialized workers that can temporarily collaborate with other teams. Notice the word is temporarily, and then they can add knowledge-based value, and the work is kind of fluid due to what is our demand. And here is where you see data scientists often providing insights across the organization and going into those different being kind of that resource pool for other teams and other parts of your organization to use. And then when we're really moving to the fully adaptable approach, we're looking at those cross-functional teams, where you've got mission specific execution and your tasks are more entrepreneurial versus goal specific or operational. You've also got much more decentralized teams that are more collaborative and multidisciplinary. So instead of using the resource pool approach, you've got people on your team that are giving that information, and you might have people co-located, and the people themselves have the ability to make decisions. And you'll see this a lot of times in things like cross-functional sales or marketing or product development teams, where you're able to deliver value to a mission faster. So again, what we're saying, I'm not saying that every part of your organization needs to be operating as a cross-functional team. I'm saying that there's different ways to have a more adaptable and flexible organization design based on what it is that the people need to be doing. And which really leads us to kind of that journey of having a more adaptable organizational design, where you might see your organization kind of being more adaptable as they go through a long term series of small changes that might eventually change the DNA of your organization. And so when we're looking at that team-based design, it focuses less on who the people work for and more on who the people work with. And so here is where you can see, okay, we're going to have a project-based cross-functional team and experimentation hubs in this part of our organization. And then we're going to be able to grow that and have a more customer mission-based teams supported by some of the core functions. And finally, we're going to have autonomous customer-focused teams that are operating fully across the organization. And you may not get there, and you may not want to get all the way to those anonymous customer-focused teams, but you should figure out where in your organization that you can do that. Which leads us to, we need to have high performing teams. You keep seeing the word team coming up over and over again, and I'm sure most of you work in a team in one way or another. And so we know that high performing individuals deliver organizational performance at a higher level. And so when organizations place a greater emphasis on the team, they helps unlock that individual performance through, really new ways of working. So when you're looking at shared customer outcomes, you're focusing on value, meaning, and customer interests in the heart of the team's activities. By the way, I've talked to so many people that say, "Oh yeah, we're moving to be a totally customer-focused organization." So you might not be using the word agile or adaptive, but if you're using the words customer focused, that's in reality what we're talking about. So you've got this high performance culture that's based on motivation. You become mission driven, not profit driven, though of course everybody still wants to make money. We're not saying you're not going to make a profit. But the idea that you'll make a profit when the customer is really the beat of your collective heart, if you're paying attention to your customer. So you need to be iterative, and you need to enable empowered execution by addressing how the team operates throughout its daily activities by continuously improving its outputs. And so here is where that agile project management is really helpful, because it's iterative and you're looking at things in pieces versus waiting for a long-term end, which gives you that fast feedback loops, which enables, to really be focused and disciplined. You can be experiment friendly, and you have the ability to deal with more ambiguity, and we'll talk a little bit more about ambiguity in a minute. And then you've got transparency and data-driven decision making, again tying back to what we're talking about, more adaptive organizations. We don't want to forget about psychological safety. It should be a shared belief that I can be my authentic self. I can openly share my ideas and opinions without the fear of negative consequences, which means you need to have a high level of trust, tied to having a high degree of team ownership and accountability, making sure that you're team rather than individual focused, and that you see visible action for both failure and success. And so when you do that, you have a clear focus, which unites the team with the organization's purpose. You should be hearing this theme coming back over and over again, because it is what is being shown in research everywhere. And that the network of your team centers upon that clear purpose and having that core set of values. You all should know why you're there and what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And that common purpose really drives and provides guidance and direction for those individuals as well as the teams, and each team having its own clear focus on what it is that they're doing. And really the number of desired outcomes sets the number of teams. And as your outcomes change, your teams are going to have to shift to meet those new demands. And having that adaptable environment really helps create a safe place for collaboration and connected ways of working, because we know that true collaboration can unlock latent productivity and inclusion. And that's why we're going to be talking about inclusion and collaboration together, because they really help each other to do what needs to be done. And that helps really to give you that higher employee engagement and helps you to accelerate the execution of your business strategy. And so looking at ways to build this collective understanding is really, really important. And so we need to invest in work environments that enable that true collaboration. So here is where we talk more about leadership capabilities. And I want you to know that, these are learnable leadership capabilities. We're done with, we have born leaders. Yes, we have people that are born to be better leaders than others, but we can all learn how to be good leaders. And so effective leaders must embrace change. They need to be able to navigate ambiguity and complexity, and they need to be able to harness an increasingly diverse workforce. Um, this is a key thing, by the way. You can't be inclusive and collaborative if you're not um, embracing your diverse workforce. And so the first thing is that you really need to be able to energize your people, you need to empower your people, and you need to connect your people together. And so one of the things that we know is that the leaders need to articulate that compelling vision and create that sense of purpose and belonging, regardless of your personality or background or then, and also to really help create that mission with your team and provide that psychological safety net. which also means if you're going to have, every organization needs to have some kind of culture of innovation to be able to to respond to all of the changes that are happening in the customer and environment and market. So you need to be able to empower others. It's really unrealistic and very inaccurate to expect a handful of people at the top of your organization to always have the best answers and ideas. And so what we're seeing is that a major predictor of creativity is in the subject matter expertise, so the people that are closest to those things. And so here's why empowering your people will help with that. And then you can then cultivate the skills that are needed for change. And in order to do that, the leaders really have to delegate responsibility and relinquish control, um, and really encourage continuous learning to help with that. Which means you have to have the ability as a leader to connect all of your people together. So you're trying to build collaboration, and especially if we have a more international or diverse workforce working in different places, and they're not working in the same building, in the same floor, in the same part of the same part of that floor. We need to make sure that you can have a way to connect people together, and making sure that you have that buy-in with your diverse stakeholders. So just kind of to summarize, is that leaders exist at all levels of the organization, and they need to be inclusive orchestrators who foster that environment for high performing teams. Which moves us back to the individual. And this is where we're going to kind of jump off the second half of this webinar, which is in second half. And I know that looks like I've gone not as far as I should, so I am apologizing. I'm talking slower, but trying not to miss anything. The traditional view of the employee assumes that people inherently resist change and that talent programs help provide that stability. And what we're seeing is that resilience and accepting change needs to become part of your organization's DNA. And the talent programs themselves need to exist to enable that resilience, not just to provide stability. Because we know that being adaptable is not something you do, it's something you become. And it's something that you can get better at. And so when you align your ecosystem, your structure, your team environment, your leadership, it's really very obvious then that you need to make sure that you need to nurture the resilience of your people in the face of that constant change. And so if you're focusing on constant change, really disruption and adaptability can help leaders forget that humans are fundamentally nervous about uncertainty. And if you haven't been feeling nervous lately, kudos to you, because I think that most of us have been. So we need to make sure that we're helping our employees become accustomed to the new ways of working. So leaders need to coach their people. And so we need our people to be able to think with a global mindset, being open to and aware of the diversity across cultures, and with a propensity to leverage those differences to find common ground. If you're going to have a global organization and you're not going to have, you know, if you're going to have a diverse workforce that's working across the world, you have to have a global mindset. You also have to have a growth mindset. So you want people that really see challenges, um, and seeing failure as a springboard for growth and how you can stretch your abilities. Also looking at having kind of a design thinking mindset where people can use their innovation and imagination to benefit your customers. And again, back to that diversity of thinking mindset, we need to be able to leverage different perspectives if we're going to meet our customer needs. So to do that, you need to go back to your job definitions and look at how your talent management part of your organization is doing this. So looking at changing your job descriptions to shift to broader roles and not be limited to one set of skills or strengths or capabilities, and having employees play a role in crafting their responsibilities based on their current behaviors. Looking at how you're doing recruitment, and so looking at, having a purpose and cultural fit is more important than sometimes that job description alignment. Sometimes you hear sports, teams say, we're looking for the best athlete. We can teach them how to, whatever it is part of that piece, but we want somebody that is a good athlete. So here's where you're looking for that culture fit, that you can teach them what they need to know. And looking at diversity of thought and experience should be a key part of that. When you're doing your traditional onboarding, you might want to start thinking about starting with your organization's purpose and culture and its customer orientation. and using rapid, job rotations to help them understand how the organization works before having them go into their specific role. And then making sure that your performance management is an ongoing discussion. It's not, I certainly hope that you're no longer just doing an annual review or even twice a year. I think, this is something that needs to be ongoing and um, replace those traditional ways of doing this. And we talked about, what people are looking for in compensation, but looking at any sort of, salary decisions that have input from your peers, more input from them versus just your superiors, making sure that you're building in learning. So making sure that, when you're recruiting people and managing your current people, understanding that they understand that learning is continuous and it needs to be built into the day-to-day work and changes versus setting up your traditional annual courses that people have to go through. And then looking at career movement. If you want to keep people, looking at how they might move horizontally in their career paths as well as vertically. So considering that as well. So Forbes put out a really interesting paper on, what do adaptable, flexible people look like? Well, they're people that like to experiment. They're open to change, which they have the kind of that emotional tolerance, mental fortitude, and spiritual guidance to face uncertainty. They see opportunity where others see failure. So, they might have to not think necessarily in black and white where you got a right or a wrong, but now you're moving to what might be the new right. They're also resourceful, so they're looking at, how can we might end up moving from plan A to plan E, but how can we figure this out? Also, you can't be resourceful unless you're thinking ahead. So being open to opportunity, looking for improvements, how can we do a better job at what we're doing? And this is kind of an interesting one. Adaptable people don't whine. Um, they know that if they can't change or influence a decision, they just move on. This one was really reassuring for me because I talk to myself all the time, and sometimes it can be really annoying for the people around me. But when I feel anxious or when I'm frustrated, I tend to just talk through things. And I never thought that this was a good thing. I've always seen it as something that probably people don't appreciate. But they're actually saying that engaging in positive self-talk, not just yelling at yourself, but also or yelling at your computer, so you're not yelling at the person, but kind of walking yourself through how to do something is a really good habit. Also, not blaming others, not holding grudges, but just saying, okay, this is the way it is. Let's move on. Also, you're not claiming fame. So if you're not blaming someone, you're not claiming fame. You understand that wherever you're at right now, you can say thank you, but then you move on and you know that the next thing's going to be happening. You've heard me talk a lot about people being curious. You can't be adaptable unless you're curious. You need to see systems, kind of that you need to actually see the entire forest, not just the individual trees. And so this systems approach is something that you've heard us talk about before, because otherwise you really can't manage the needs of the individual trees if you're not seeing what their role is within that forest. You also have to open your minds and be willing to listen to other people. You need to have context, and that's where we talked about that ecosystem, having that being very broad. So the more context you have, the more choices that you're going to be able to see. And you also need to know what you stand for. So again, looking at that purpose, what are you here for? Why are you there? And what is it that that you don't want to be doing that helps manage what it is that you do? There's another university called Goodwin University that talks about within their curriculum 7 qualities of adaptable people. So, you need to be able to adjust at any moment. We've talked about that. And I'm going to go through a bit on this a little bit quicker just because some of it is some things we've talked about before. Always thinking about how can we make it better? How can we be curious about everything? How can we make sure that it's okay? We want people to ask questions and explore issues and really look at things from all angles. We want people to see opportunity over obstacles. And so, knowing that the solution that we used yesterday might not be the solution for today. And so, how can we get where we need to be in a different way? We need people that can work in teams. Back when I was a high school teacher, a long, long time ago, that was really when this idea of that we need to start teaching our kids to work in teams. And you'll see in almost every school today that we expect all of our students at all ages to be able to work together. We also want people to be visionaries. Again, people who are prepared. If you're not prepared and proactive, if you're not horizon scanning and looking forward, if you're not imaginative and creative, you're not going to be able to figure a different way out, which means you need to be emotionally intelligent. You have to have that capacity to care and be tolerant of others and to be able to see things the way other people are seeing them. And you need to be positive. We none of us wants to be around that negative Nelly person. And so again, they're talking about different paper, same idea that you need to engage in that positive self-talk to get through some of things and help other people to do the same. So LinkedIn has some interesting pieces in their talent solutions, and what they have said is that um, adaptability is essential for thriving in this rapidly changing work environment, and that 69% of hiring managers say the most important soft skill they screen for is adaptability. So some of the questions, and this is kind of tying into our what are we looking for in employees? And so when you're interviewing people, tell me about a time when you were asked to do something you'd never done before. How did you react? What did you learn? And what you're really listening for is excitement about tackling new challenges and a willingness to leave their comfort zone, knowing that they'll learn something valuable. You can ask them, describe a situation in which you embraced a new system, a process, or technology or idea that was a major departure from the old ways of doing things. And here you're looking for, new ways of doing things, that they're eager again, that they're excited about this, and what they discovered as a new way of doing things. And did they actually embrace that change? You can also ask, recall a time when you were assigned to a task outside of your job description. How did you handle the situation and what was the outcome? And this is really what you're looking for, is an understanding that their job may evolve and what is their willingness to try something new and take the necessary steps to ensure that they were successful. And then tell me about the biggest change you've ever dealt with. How did you adapt to that change? And if you can't come up with an example from the last couple of years, I don't know. Most of us have gone through lots of changes and we've had to adapt. And so just that understanding, that acceptance, that change is inevitable, and really how they focused on how to be successful during that time and evaluating that new situation and finding a way to get it done. And then the final question they have is, tell me about a time when you had to adjust to a colleague's working style in order to complete a project or achieve your outcomes. And this kind of goes to that emotional intelligence piece. What is your willingness to be flexible when it's required? What's your ability to reflect on what they've learned from the experience, both good and bad? So we know that recruiters want applicants to be able to demonstrate that they can adapt to changing circumstances. And they want people with personal confidence who can respond positively to change. So to do that, you need that receptiveness, particularly to change. You need people to be creative, to be able to modify their behavior and be able to show that intellectual or cognitive flexibility to keep an open mind. So here is some kind of job ads. So at civil service fast stream recruitment literature says, um, you need to be able to deal with the unexpected and what might be on your experience. So could you travel to 3 jobs in as many years, or could you do 3 different jobs in as many years? Could you travel around the country on your own, working from a laptop? Could you fly out to Brussels to explain policy to our European partners? These are some quotes that were taken from some different job advertisements, and they're not actually using the words adaptable or flexible, but they are looking for candidates who have these qualities. So they're looking for a positive can-do attitude with a willingness to grasp opportunities, be able to work positively in an ever-changing, fast-paced environment. We're after ambitious people who can respond with pace and energy to every issue they face, that are open to learning new systems and procedures, that demonstrate a dynamic approach. And we're looking for people who have the right attitude towards change, who respond positively. You see that word over and over again, and the challenges and opportunities it brings. Again, so if you're asking questions, how do you manage conflict? How do you handle disagreements in the workplace? So share a time when you faced a conflict while working on a team. How did you handle that? You're looking for people that can problem solve. Tell me about a time when you needed to get information from someone who wasn't very responsive. What did you do? If you're looking at people to manage change, describe a time when your team or company underwent some change and how did that impact you and how did you adapt? Looking at how you manage stress or failure. Tell me about a time you failed and how did you deal with that situation? Looking at multitasking, share an example of a time when you managed numerous responsibilities. How did you handle it? Again, emotional intelligence, share an example of a time when you were able to successfully persuade someone to see things your way at work. What's your proudest accomplishment? And tell me about when you worked under extremely close or loose supervision. How did you handle that? What is how do you like to be managed? Just even understanding this about yourself is important. And so you need to increase your adaptability and flexibility skills. I mean, knowing that most of us are actually a lot more resistant to change than we actually might believe, because it's adaptability is more than being flexible. It's about being open to things, even outside your comfort zone, and really not making preconceived judgments like, I could never do that, or that'll be too hard for me. You hear people saying that all the time. And so I'm just warning you, it's time to leave your comfort zone. Adaptability is about continually developing more of what you're truly capable of and living up to your own potential. Sometimes you just have to push yourself. And so I'm giving that keep calm advice. Just keep calm and just say yes. Stretch yourself in small ways. And so one of the things they say is, and I remember this as a parent, someone shared this with me on saying, say yes whenever you can. Save the no's for when it really matters. And I know that, most 3-year-olds, the first word they learn is no, because we're always telling them, no, 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 don't do that. So the question becomes, how can you say yes when it's a low stakes situation and just doing things when it doesn't stress you? And so just saying yes to something you might normally say no to helps you be able to do that when it's more important. And so one of the things that research says is that people who are able to come up with solutions to a problem are better able to cope with problems than those that can't. So practicing saying yes in the ways that are non-threatening to you is one way to do that. And so when you encounter a new challenge, make a quick list of some of the potential ways that you could solve that problem. Experiment with different strategies and focus on developing a logical way to work through those common problems. So being able to think, you need to be able to think creatively. So work through different ways of doing things. And I love this embrace ambiguity picture, because none of us wants to be here at the beginning of chaos, right? And so what are some ways that you can try to help yourself be better at embracing ambiguity? What are some ways you can help, you know, be more emotionally intelligent? And then there's tons of places that you can go to help yourself with that. And then, how can you help yourself to either maintain the direction you need to be in or shift in accordance with the organization's changing priorities? And so when you're looking at your actual purpose and goals, which was where we started this presentation, this is going to help you understand whether you need to stay on track where you are or shift because things have changed in a way that requires you to shift. And just kind of in closing, if you haven't read Who Moved My Cheese, it's a really great book, and I would really recommend that you take a look at it. And the question I would have you ask yourself is, what would you do if you weren't afraid? It's a big question. What would you do if you weren't afraid? And so think about that and think about how you can do those things that you might want to do if you weren't afraid, and how you can incrementally move yourself to be more adaptable and more accepting of change. As always, when you get your webinar certificate, we will share with you the references. There aren't as many this time. Lots of them are on people that are hiring, as well as educators, in addition to the Deloitte article on the adaptable organization that I really like. We hope you can join us next month, and as we talk about achieving your goals by being resourceful, creative, and innovative. And some of what we're going to talk about will be built on what we talked about in the December webinar about having an innovative culture. So what does an innovative organization look like, and what kinds of people does it need to have, in order to make, or how can an organization help its people to be more resourceful, creative, and innovative? And then again, in the post-webinar survey, share your ideas and what you'd like to learn more about. Our webinars for the rest of the year starting in August have not been fully fleshed out yet, and we are trying to be more agile and adaptive and meet our customer needs as well. So we're asking you for some of your suggestions. We, of course, do offer education on how to be a leader in really in organizational resilience and implementing those strategies. And you can also earn a certification as a certified organization and resilience manager, professional, or executive. And finally, you can measure your organization's resilience as well with our organizational resilience capability assessment, and you can gain recognition from ICOR for that. And don't forget to contact us. So if you're not following us on LinkedIn, please do so. And check out our iCorrespondence newsletter. We generally post a webinar every month. Sometimes we get behind and they come out more frequently after a pause. Thank you for joining us today. And I will take a look at the questions and answer those in response to the survey or in reply to your when you get your webinar certificate. So thank you very much, and we hope we see you next month.